Welcome to the show, IB Nation Sports Talk. Sean Stiers, and I've got an old friend in with us today. You were here, not on my channel or not my show, but on this channel just a couple of weeks ago with Brian Driscoll. It's Tim Priester. Good to have you back.
Yeah, well, thanks, Sean. You said an old friend, which is true. Also, old adversaries.
That's right. Old NIC baseball adversaries. That's right.
Yes. What year?
Jesse will be along here in a little bit, so you'll get some of him as well. So,
oh, fantastic! What years did we overlap?
I think I coached JV for a couple of years. The varsity year, I think it was 2013. Was that your last year as head coach?
No, 2012 was my last year.
Okay, I'm trying to think. So I don't think we went head to head as head coaches then. So
okay, so you were in the dugout though. You were in the opposite. Yeah.
Exactly. Okay. You were the varsity coach. I was the JV coach there for a couple of years, but in the dugout because Jesse was there and tried to, stay away during varsity games as much as possible. But yeah. Hey, Joe Turnock, your successor, had a pretty good year this year over there.
Yeah, he had a really good team. It's unfortunate they didn't get past the regional. He had a really good team. I would say the best team, the most talented team that he has had since our 2012 team.
Really?
Yeah.
And that's, how it goes. Your most talented team doesn't always end up going the farthest just because of who you have to play sometimes once you get to the postseason.
Well, they're still young. Most of his team's back. We're talking about stuff people don't want to hear about.
Yeah, that's right.
It's a conversation that we're having on the air.
That's exactly right. Did you ever think about, you played baseball obviously at Notre Dame. Did you think about trying to be a college coach at any point?
I really didn't. I mean, I think that after I became a high school coach, then I thought if Paul Maneri asked me to be his assistant coach, yes, I would do that. I really only had an interest in coaching at two schools, both my alma mater, Mishawaka Marian High School and Notre Dame. I don't think that I would have gone into because, I've been a journalist since the early 80s. So that was my first love, but I certainly fell in love with coaching, and we had a bit of success, which contributes to your interest to it. But maybe later on, had there been an opportunity at Notre Dame, I might have done something like that.
Well, I mean, you're basically the godfather of the football beat at Notre Dame at this point. How many years is this? What are you going into now on the beat?
42.
42. So you've already man. You're more advanced than I even would have.
Yeah. Well, Joe Doyle was the godfather of Notre Dame football coverage when I was growing up in South Bend.
Yeah,
and knew him quite well. And so 42 years, whatever category that places me in, Sean. It's one of the older ones. This much we know.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Well, you talked about working in journalism, and that's obviously what you do. I remember you telling me before you weren't necessarily formally trained in journalism at Notre Dame. What made you decide to do this for a living?
Oh, geez. I knew when I was 12, I wanted to be a sports writer. That was a given, but I didn't, I went to Notre Dame. There's not a journalism major at Notre Dame.
Mm-hmm.
I probably should have been in American studies, but I was an English major. I knew at a really, really young age that sports writing was what I wanted to do. So
what was that beat like back in the 80s? I can only imagine, because like now
A lot easier.
I bet it was. Like, this is one of the big Notre Dame's always had one of the bigger beats around. Has it, at least in recent, I'm going on year 24, I think here. So like, has it always been one of the bigger beats as far as you know?
Well, yeah, but I
In
mean,
terms of just, the amount of people covering it.
when I say it was easier, there's no internet, there's no social media. And
Exactly.
you put out 20 newspapers a year. So think about that. Now, game days, season, those are hectic and difficult for everybody that's involved. But we didn't I mean, literally 20 newspapers a year. It was a lot easier. And as far as, I mean, back in the day, we talk about it now. It was the South Bend Tribune and Blue and Gold Illustrated. Those were
Yeah.
the only two media outlets that were at practice every day when practice was open to the media through most of Holtz's tenure. And then at the end, they started closing things down. Growing up, again, when I started in the business, Joe Paterno his practices were always closed at Penn State. Notre Dame remained open until about the time we got to the mid 90s.
Why did Lou start to close it down at that point? Was it just kind of like more TV and stuff like that being around?
And I think it was probably more they reached their peak in 93 and then 94, 95.
Oh, yeah. Kind of
They
backsliding a little
started
bit.
to tail off a little bit. I don't remember the reason. I mean, if I were in that position, I would have closed practices too, because, I mean, you saw all the blemishes then.
Yeah,
On a daily
absolutely.
basis.
The stuff that we wish that we could see now,
Oh,
right?
right. Yeah, exactly.
That we're never going to get to see.
Yeah.
I just rewatched the 30 for 30, the Catholics versus convicts 30 for 30 about a week or so ago. And, like you talked about, there's no internet, there's no college game day at that point. Like ESPN was still relatively new, really. There's no NBC contract even for that matter. What was the buildup like going into that game with so relatively, such a relatively small sort of media pool, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, that was also a time, Sean, when national media traveled more. I mean, they can't, you had more
That's true
national
too.
media at Notre Dame games. I don't remember specifically what it was like that day, but I don't remember Catholics versus convicts being a real topic of conversation at that point. It became famous after that. I know that they talked about it during that broadcast. But I don't remember that being real prominent as, to the buildup of the game. But, I mean, I look back at those years and you just feel privileged to have been involved with games like that. USC at the end of 88.
Yeah.
The 89 season when, arguably that team was as good as the 88 team. They just went. I recently spent an hour in a Zoom with Lou Holtz, and he blames himself for that 23 game winning streak ending at Miami because he said he had the team in the wrong frame of mind. He didn't want them. It was a big deal about not starting a fight, and he felt like in retrospect that he had kind of taken away some of his team's emotion that night.
Tamped it down a little bit.
Yeah, and they hung in that game. They had a chance to win. What was it, 3rd and 45 conversion?
Right.
That would, they had a chance to win. The score ended up being like a 17-point differential, but it was closer than that. They didn't play their best football. It's kind of hard to back in that day with a 23 game winning streak going into Miami, where the hate in that stadium, Sean, was so palpable. I mean, it really was. And, as you get older, you glorify some of those days. But I'm telling you, man, the hate in the old Orange Bowl, not the game, the stadium, was incredible that night. You could feel it. Fans talked about it, about how they were treated. It's
Like
unfortunate, but
Notre
that's
Dame fans talked about how they were treated
about
down there?
how poorly they were treated, yeah, at
Really?
Miami. Yep,
Interesting.
yep,
I mean, Jimmy Johnson was gone by then. That was Dennis Erickson in
yes.
'89. '88 was Jimmy's last season. I also just saw the Jimmy Johnson Football Life on NFL Network, and I didn't realize this until there was a little. He was up for the Arkansas job at whatever point that was in his career, and
His
Lou
alma
Holtz,
mater,
yeah, his alma mater, and Lou ended up getting it instead.
yeah.
Did that ever come up back then? Like, do you know if that was kind of part of the,
I don't
added
really
maybe a little fuel to the fire?
I mean, I think that's a great point, and it probably did. I don't have a recollection of that. I mean, just put those two personalities in the same stadium,
Yeah, that's, I
and you're
mean,
gonna you're gonna get a very and then the magnitude of the game and the level of play of both teams. It was remarkable. But I mean, Holtz, when I talked to him recently, he mentioned it again that the schedule that Notre Dame played and had success against was incredible. I mean, you got a 23 game winning streak and you're playing top 10 teams a third of those games.
yeah, exactly. And it's like I've got this thing with that schedule out there. It wasn't like it was a bunch of cream puffs by any
No,
means that they
no,
were playing back then. And just like you said, it's like not only was Miami a big game that year, that the USC game almost gets overlooked, I think, a little bit there at the end of the season, because that was 1 versus 2 when going into that game.
right. And you had Michigan in there, and Notre Dame was Holtz dominated USC during the hell. If USC was really good in '88, they started to tail off. Yeah, I may be misremembering here a little bit, but yeah,
Yeah.
it was a really really difficult schedule, and even to this day, Lou Holtz kind of marvels at the success they had against that level of schedule.
I can only imagine what Jimmy Johnson's press conference was like after that '88 game. Were you present for that?
We were separate. I'm pretty sure that we were separate at that point, uh,
Okay.
like we are today. So unless you're multi-staffed and send somebody, to the other locker room, Sean, my memory isn't as good.
Hey,
There
it's
may,
only been what, 35
yeah,
years?
a lot of water under the bridge since then. But
Yeah.
I do remember, and the Irish Illustrated subscribers have heard this story. But when Notre Dame played Florida State in '93, 1 versus 2, Holtz would have, there would be people from out of town, and he would have a gathering at his house on Thursday night. And I mean, the magnitude of that game was certainly as big as the buildup for Miami in '88. It was 1 versus 2, and I had never been invited to one of his Thursday night home week gatherings, but I was invited to the one when they played Florida State. And I mean, there's there are NBC officials there. By that point, they did have the
They
NBC.
did have NBC, yeah.
And I can remember, and I was with Blue and Gold Illustrated. And again, the number of media outlets was very limited. So, those of us that did cover Notre Dame were kind of recognizable. We had our newspaper, and you had your picture in the paper. And I knew that I knew Regis Philbin, being a Notre Dame graduate, was a fan. He subscribed to our paper. Anyway, my point being that I'm at this gathering and I'm across the way, and I look up and it's like, man, that's Regis Philbin. And he looks at me and he says, Tim, and he waves to me. And I was just like, he knows who I am, which is still amazing to me today. But that's the magnitude of Notre Dame football. And certainly at that time, because of the Notre Dame Florida State game in '93 was, that was a tremendous game. The late great Lou Somogyi and I always agreed that the following week, the loss to Boston College was the most devastating of our lives as followers slash
Gotta
media
be. Yeah.
of Notre Dame. I was 12 years old when Anthony Davis scored 6 touchdowns against Notre Dame, and that was pretty devastating for a 12-year-old. But as an adult, the loss to Boston College on David Gordon's 42-yard field goal, I believe, was pretty devastating.
I can't imagine how
I
quiet the
talked about that
stadium.
too, and he said, "Yeah, that was his most difficult loss as a coach." Period.
I can only imagine. And when you look at the way that season ended, there's obviously, you know, a great case that it should have been Notre Dame and Florida State
It should have
tied
been.
at number one.
Yeah, it should have been. It's just that the system,
So different back then.
yeah, it was, and there was, I mean, I grew up where when Notre Dame started going to bowl games. I'm not sure. What was my point there? I lost my train of thought. I got a lot of thoughts going through my head.
End of the '93 season, Notre Dame and Florida State.
Oh yeah, what I was starting to say was, the bowls determined who played. It didn't really matter what records were when Notre Dame, first entered the fray full time with bowl games. Notre Dame played the year after '93 and '94. Notre Dame played in the Fiesta Bowl. They were 6-4-1.
Mm-hmm.
They had no business being in that game. So it's better today. I know, it's still not a perfect system because football is not a perfect game for a playoff system. You can't play every other day or every 3 days like you can in other sports. So it kind of it prevents you from having, the true determination of a playoff and champion because you can only play so many games. But we have a 12-game playoff coming into play next year, so we're going to be covering games in December coming up here in Notre Dame Stadium.
Well, it's amazing because you mentioned that, and obviously there's a great chance that whether it's Notre Dame or Michigan or Ohio State or Penn State, Wisconsin, take your pick, that they'll have opportunities to host those playoff games in December. And I remember asking Marcus Freeman about it toward the end of the season, and he's like he's all for it. But just a week or so ago, these Big Ten teams were upset because they found out that when they signed this big NBC contract, they're actually going to have to host some night games in November. Yeah. It's like, come on, what are we doing here?
I know, and I know, I never heard any when the 12-team playoff was announced and the discussion of it, the negotiations. I never heard anybody say that they took a poll of the players, and the players said, I mean, was the players' thoughts on playing
exactly
an additional 2 or 3 games ever considered? I don't think it was, which is, pretty unfortunate. But that is that's the world that we live in college sports, professional sports.
By the way, for our live listeners / viewers, if you have questions, you can throw them in there in the chat, and we'll discuss them here. I saw some people asking if we were going to, kind of keep going down triple option lane there with old memories or whatever.
We should talk present days, please, Sean.
Well, I mean, you just had the article with in the interview with Brian Polian talking about the Goog renovations. We talked about it a little bit on our show yesterday. I'm curious. Some people were asking why Brian Polian. Like, did you pursue Brian Polian? Where did what's the origin of that?
I'm working on another project, and so that took me to getting in contact with him, and then the whole Goog and renovation, all that. I'm not even really sure how that came up. It wasn't like it wasn't like he called me and said, "Hey, I want to tell you about how lousy Notre Dame's setup is in the Goog," and nor was it me saying, "All right, tell me how bad it is." It just became part of our interview and conversation, and he kind of he elaborated and embellished upon it. I know that the Holtz Foundation Twitter account made a comment, because he said,
saw that,
it's not like the old days with Lou, and I mean, his point was that, you had minimal facilities back then. It was just it was different. You didn't it was a less tactical game then. It was more lineup and who's the more physical team. That doesn't really have anything to do with facilities. It was just a comment that he made, and I thought, oh, that's a good, that here's a former coach who had 2 stints at Notre Dame, 5 years with Weiss and 5 years with Kelly. I wasn't trying to stir anything up, and he wasn't either. It was just part of the conversation, and I said, so you tell me, you've experienced it. You've been at LSU,
Mhm.
Texas A&M. Compare facilities, and it just went there. When neither one of us were trying. I knew I had something that would be interesting that people would talk about, so we rolled with it.
I thought it was pretty interesting because of what you said. He has been at both places, and I saw the Holtz's Heroes make some kind of reference to Notre Dame doesn't get involved in the arms race. The facilities arms, something along those lines, and obviously
That was my comment. I
that
maybe
was your comment. Okay,
yeah,
well,
maybe I shouldn't have used arms races, but that's kind of an old phrase that started to come about a few years ago when
right.
facilities began expanding and expanding.
But I mean, Polian has been at both places, and he had, some very specific comments in there about how things are done at LSU, and he knows how things are done at Notre Dame. Because that's like one thing, like we might see football stadiums when we go on the road, but you don't get to see
Yeah,
inside these football
right. And let me
facilities.
let me clarify something, Sean, because I people still say, well, it's embarrassing. I hate when people say if it's embarrassing for you, don't be a Notre Dame fan. If it's so embarrassing for you, don't
Right.
do it. Okay.
I'm
But
glad you said that because that kind of rubs me the wrong way as well. It's embarrassing this. It's
yeah,
embarrassing.
yeah.
I see that a little bit too often.
My point being, Notre Dame does not lack in access to nutrition. That's inaccurate. The problem is the facility and the inconvenience that is involved for the team and certainly the personnel that set it up. And I'm near and dear to some of the personnel that set up these dinners and stuff. And that's the comment. Notre Dame has a training table. Notre Dame has the players have plenty of access to nutrition. Sometimes we talk about nutrition like every football player is dialed into his nutrition and he's not going out eating Big Macs and pizza. I mean, that's crazy. They're kids. Of course they do that. Notre Dame provides all the nutrition that they need. Notre Dame football decides what they eat.
Right.
It's the facility that is inconvenient.
Yeah, it's funny because like Audric Estime, how'd you lose weight? Well, I stopped eating Big Macs or whatever. No, I guess it was the
Racing
chicken
was it
down the street. Yeah, right.
was it
The
Raising
Raising
Cane's?
Canes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, and there were a couple other guys like that as well. What'd you do to lose weight? Well, I stopped eating a bunch of junk.
Yeah.
It's pretty,
And they
it's
have
as simple as that.
Tim O'Malley, who works with us at Irish Illustrated, he's about to do an interview with the nutritionist at Notre Dame. Notre Dame has nutritionists. They're on top of
Yeah.
all of that. What they need is a renovation of the Goog to make the process a little bit simpler for everybody.
Well, Vince and I were talking about this yesterday, and it really seems like, they're fairly limited by the space around the Goog. There's not obviously a lot of free space in between the nutrition aspect, between the fact that you've got a growing staff with all these analysts, that are involved now and
Right.
everything else. Really, it's that space there between the south side of the Goog and the north side of the Irish Athletic Center across the street. That's one of the few spaces it seems like where they really
Yeah.
have to expand. What do you think?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I guess I don't really know what the blueprints look like, but they just need a larger open space to do it. And you've been up there, right, Sean? You've been
Mm-hmm.
up there before, and it's. I mean, when we're talking about a football, if you're talking about a baseball team or a basketball team, that's one thing. A football team, which is way more than a basketball, and 3 times what a baseball team would be. It's just, it's inconvenient. Now, does it? This is what I argue. Does it dissuade recruits from coming to Notre Dame? What do you think they come there on their visit and say, wow, this is really kind of confined space. I just don't think that 17, 18-year-olds are thinking along those lines.
I don't either.
But
And go ahead.
well, I mean, but I was just going to get back. Brian Polian's lived on both sides,
Right.
and he said it does make a difference. So, I have to believe him because he's experienced it, and we have it. We've talked about it. We can imagine it, but he lived it, and so that's why I thought it was. Neither one of us were trying to stir something up, but when you realize that you have something that people are going to be interested in, yeah, I ran with it.
Yeah. And I mean, I didn't read it that way, but it's especially what, you take a couple quotes out of context and there's always the
Well, look,
potential.
Sean,
So,
I've been doing this 41 years. In each of those 41 years, there is always a segment. It's a minority, but it's a vocal minority. But each one of those 41 years, there's been a segment of people that of Notre Dame fans that are always angry. They're never happy with what's going on with the team. Somebody's screwing up. Somebody is not doing their job well. I always say it's athletic competition. Not everything is going to go smoothly, especially now with the transfer portal. Your roster is never going to be. You're never going to have enough of every position, and that's not Notre Dame. That's every school. I mean, Alabama had to go out and get Tyler Buckner because their quarterback situation isn't good. So if it can happen to them, it can happen to everybody. But there's a segment that's always unhappy with what's going on with Notre Dame football and Mississippi football and Missouri football and Arizona State football and on and on and on. And I just don't, to me, I feel privileged to have spent my whole life doing this. It's an honor to do it. It sucks when Notre Dame's not good, but it's athletic competition. And God did not say that Notre Dame's going to be great in football every year. Nor did he say that for, UCLA or anyone else. It's just the way it is.
we've been pretty fortunate since 2016. We've been able to see some good football.
Yeah, I mean, I always go back to 63 wins in 6 years, and the disgruntled portion of fandom treats 63 wins in 6 years as if it was nothing. Somebody said that Notre Dame's been lapped. They've got the 5th best record in all of college football in the last 6 years. Championships? No. But how many teams do win championships?
I mean,
how do you
much
think,
two.
Yeah, I mean, how do you think Texas feels these days, or Tennessee, or UCLA,
Right.
or and up until last year, USC? It's hard to win, man. It's hard to win. The SEC has an advantage because they function basically under no limits.
I've got a question here. I was listening to you talk, and I wanted to find the question that kind of goes along with what you're talking about, because what are we talking about now? Going to the next level. And Joe says, first, thanks for your excellent coverage to you, Tim, throughout the years. His question: what is your opinion of Coach Freeman's recruiting as opposed to Brian Kelly's recruiting in his best years?
Well, there's a level, Sean, I think, as you probably know, and I think Joe probably knows too, a level of relentlessness that Marcus Freeman brought to the equation. Being in your mid-30s helps with that. Being a first-time head coach, you're more motivated to do it. But I just think that it's a relentlessness and an effort and a total involvement in the recruiting process, whereas Brian Kelly, and again, a guy that's been in the business that long, it's hard to maintain that edge year after year after year. But Brian Kelly was a closer, and that was really the only involvement he wanted in the recruiting process, which makes it very difficult, certainly on the staff that has to do all the legwork leading up to that. I think it's harder. I think if the basketball coach is just a closer, like Mike Bray generally was, I think that's more difficult to overcome because there's a limited number of players, and those players expect the head coach to be in your house,
right,
right away. If you're competing with the big boys, the head coaches are in the house. But I think that's mainly it. Marcus Freeman's effort, the demands. He puts a lot of demands on his assistant coaches to be thorough and relentless. And so I think that's the big thing. Now, has it come to fruition? Has it paid off? I think it's a little early to say that, but I do think that Notre Dame, we always talk about the Notre Dame shops down a different aisle. Well, they're shopping down a little bit of a different aisle from Brian Kelly. There's a greater emphasis on high 4 stars and 5 stars, whereas I think Brian Kelly just kind of started to back away from that a little bit. Knowing that it's really difficult for Notre Dame to land 5 stars, especially now with NIL, it's only going to become more difficult.
I think that's going to be Marcus Freeman's biggest challenge, really, because he is, he's obviously done really well with recruiting, but the 3 top guys at the top of the class last year ended up going somewhere else. The guys who you think can really be the biggest difference makers, obviously. But I've got to think that just having Marcus Free, like you talk, the difference between Kelly the closer and really, like if you're going to use a baseball analogy, like Freeman, like the starter, the workhorse out there. The fact that he is in on these guys so early seems to have generate some extra buy-in, long-term buy-in from these guys going through the recruiting process.
Well, we're going to use baseball analogies. Marcus Freeman pitches complete games.
There you go.
As it refers to recruiting, because he's involved from the beginning. Now, and that will change in time too. It has to. I mean, the demands on his time, what he does during the summer, it's like, where's Waldo? He pops up everywhere. It doesn't.
It's amazing.
It doesn't. Yeah, it really is. And so that's a great thing to have. I respect that a great amount. The job today for college football coaches is outrageously unfair. It's absurd. And that's why, when fans are saying that this coach isn't working hard, we have absolutely no idea what those people have to go through. I don't know how you raise a family. I don't know how you can be involved in a family setting with what's expected of coaches today. And it's more difficult now because of NIL and the transfer portal.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you look at Marcus Freeman and such a young family that he has, and keeping up with that schedule that he's got. It's just amazing that
I can, having done this as long as I have, some of the most dysfunctional families that I've ever seen in my entire life are the families of coaches. It's just, I'm not talking about now per se. I'm talking about, my previous experiences, but it's a tough dynamic, and it's even more difficult now.
Yep, it really is. Question from Irish Chi-Town. Thoughts on the general manager position at Notre Dame? Who would be your pick? Now, have they filled this already?
They did. I can't even tell you off the top of my head the person's name.
It seemed like they did, but I can't think of his name either.
It's just another layer to this. You talked about running out of room at the Goog. I mean, it's just, I think it's a great thing. That's actually Brian Polian had gone from recruiting special teams coordinator to general manager. And then are you aware that Brian Polian's not at LSU anymore, Sean?
I am.
Okay.
After I read your article,
I
was aware.
Yeah, right.
Because I didn't realize that he had left to become an athletic director.
When I engaged in conversation with him, I actually did not know that.
Okay.
He went to his alma mater. He went back to his alma mater, John Carroll University. He might not be done with coaching, but it was an opportunity that he chose. Obviously, he's making a lot less money. But I got to say this, and I mean, to his credit, he has a special needs son.
Okay.
Who's not having a great experience in Baton Rouge. And so Brian Polian chose what was in the best interest of his family.
Okay. Well, good for him. I didn't realize that. So, all right.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So
And that,
when
you
I
know,
know
there's going to be long hours even at a small school being an athletic director, but at
no
the
doubt,
same time, you're
no
home a
doubt
heck of a lot more often. Yeah.
no doubt about it. But Brian's a pretty complex dude. The son of Bill Polian. He's
Mm-hmm.
experienced from an early age high level football. He did some good things as special teams coordinator. When you see a Brian Mason come through Notre Dame, you realize what a truly great special teams coordinator is like. Brian, again, in typical fashion, because so many people are follow Notre Dame and spend their whole time being angry about it. I thought Brian Polian did a better job at special teams at Notre Dame than he was given credit for. Now, they were dreadful last year at LSU. There's no denying that.
Yeah.
But
I mean, they were a liability before he was hired. He at least turned them into a break-even point.
Special teams, it's hard to be good at special teams. It is, because there's so many moving pieces and so many factors. You're responsible for so many aspects of special teams. The kind of the neat thing about Marty Biagi, Notre Dame's new special teams coach, is that he was a punter and a kicker in college. Most special teams coaches do not have an expertise in the actual kicking part of the game.
Right.
Marty Biagi does. So, maybe the punters and kickers can lean on him a little bit more.
Yeah, most special teams coaches tend to go talk to your specialty coach, I guess.
Well,
that
and
kind of thing.
We did talk about Charlie Weiss gave him a ton of time to work on special teams. Brian Kelly did not. And imagine being a coach, you have a coordinator title and you're begging for an extra 5 minutes of practice time.
Right.
So.
And I mean, you do see it in what practices, full practices that we have been able to see. We have seen more time devoted to special teams this, last year and this year compared to when Polian was there.
Yeah. I mean, Brian,
point.
Right. Brian Mason's a great, flat out great special teams coach, but it sure helped having Marcus Freeman give him the time and access that he needed. And Marty Biagi should benefit from that as well.
So we've got another question in here from Michael. When was the last time Notre Dame had a dominant defensive line?
Well,
I don't know if you'd call it completely dominant. The 2012 team, was that probably the last,
Yeah. Of
really
course,
good one
to say that. I was, you go back to 93, during that stretch, those were some great defensive lines. But yeah, 2012. And, Clark Lee's defenses were really, really good. Notre Dame's had a string of good defense. They faltered last year. If they'd been better in the red zone last year, I don't think that we would have noticed it as much. Hi, Jesse.
Hey, Tim. How are you?
Good. How you doing?
Long time no see.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Where'd we run into it? Oh, at the College World Series.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah. If you have a dominant defensive line with a dominant offensive line, we're talking about even more success. Generally, that's where it starts.
I came out of spring feeling at least better about this defensive line that I thought I was probably,
I agree, Sean. I agree. I think we all kind of felt that way. And that, when we saw them, they got the best of the offensive line. Now, new offensive line coach, 2 new guards. Chemistry along an offensive line is never a given. But the D line did do some good things. It would have been worse had it been the other way around. We would have felt even worse about it. But I made this comment on the Irish Illustrated Insider podcast today that if you look at the preseason magazines are starting to come out, and you look at the list of the top defensive ends and defensive tackles and linebackers, there's really only one Notre Dame defensive player, and that's Benjamin Morrison. So that's a little bit concerning. I think their depth is pretty good, though. They've got to get a pass rush. I'm not exactly sure where it's coming from. The second year of the Al Golden regime is helpful.
I think so too.
When you have, when you have 3 different coordinators in 3 years, which is what they had, that's tough. I don't care how good the coordinator is. So hopefully they'll benefit from having a second year of Al Golden. Al Golden's a very good coach. I don't know that he's a great defensive coach, but he's a very good coach. And I thought he was a good hire at the time.
I did too. And I think you could at least you could see some things kind of getting cleaned up in spring number 2 with Al Golden in there. I guess we'll have to wait and see just exactly how that translates when it's time. Jesse, did you have anything for Tim before we let him go tonight?
Did any baseball questions sneak their way through to you, Tim?
Yeah, but only Sean and I were interested in talking about it. None of us want to hear it. So
I did
unless
see.
you talk about Notre Dame baseball, and I'd be happy to talk.
Yeah, Notre Dame baseball. Someone was asking, if we think they'll make the tournament next year. What they ended up being without Jack Penny, their top power hitter, and of course without Jack Findlay as well down the stretch. I mean, unfortunately, things kind of unraveled down that stretch without those guys. What'd you think overall of Sean Stifler's first season?
I'm just fearful, and sorry, Tim, just before you go, I'm fearful that they're gonna get caught up with the leftovers of the old regime, and will that continue into the new regime? Like, do we see any sort of incline after this, or is this kind of like the final push, and we might see a more kind of bigger drop off next season? That's what I'm most fearful of.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we quickly go into the Stifler era in terms of his people. I think you're going to see, transfers again this year. Basically, the team that won the regional at Notre Dame 2 years ago, and then the team that went to the College World Series, those guys are gone.
Yeah, it's gone now.
So, I don't know the level of talent of the younger players. I haven't studied the recruits that will be coming in and that kind of thing, but it's a rebuild. I'm a little concerned because Link Jarrett is, that's the finest baseball coach I've ever been around. That guy was so intuitive. It was scary. Now, Sean Stifler made a couple significant moves this year that really helped. One of them was getting Vinny Martinez. He just said, I got to play Vinny Martinez. And Martinez struggled early, and then he took off.
He just hit home run after home run, it seemed, the back half of the season.
Right. Now, Link Jarrett had Jack Penny playing second, but he put him at third base, mainly because Estevan Moreno came in and you had to play him. You had to play him all the time. The other move that Stifler made was that he took Ziska out of the lineup, who wasn't producing, and they put DM Jefferson in the lineup, and by and large he produced. So there were a couple of quality moves. They couldn't string anything together, but they also avoided long losing streaks. When the season ended, they ended on a 4-game losing streak.
Right.
They had not lost 3 in a row since March. So they were good about getting themselves out of ruts, but they never seemed to really be able to string stuff together.
That's true. They kind of plugged, kept themselves in contention. Yeah. But like you said, they never other than that Virginia series, there was nothing,
right. My MVP of the team is Zach Preisner. That kid was so consistent.
He was.
I will say this: 41 years ago, I was on the Notre Dame baseball team. So I go back. I was on it for 3 years. So I go back 44 years of Notre Dame baseball. Zach Preisner is the most consistent defensive shortstop I've seen at Notre Dame. He was automatic, and that was a tough position. When I got to Notre Dame, I was a shortstop, and I became a third baseman. I was not good enough to play that position at that level. Preisner made himself into a quality hitter. He made himself into a 2-hitter. His mom said to me, he doesn't like hitting in the 8-hole. And I said, Beth, I hit in the 8-hole my whole time at Notre Dame. Oh, I didn't mean that. I said,
And you can still, what is an 8-hole hitter? Well, he's a starter. He's still on the field. He's still in the lineup every day.
Exactly. But no, it's going to be, it's going to be a transition. Again, second time through with Stifler, he'll have a better lay of the land, a better idea about the landscape, but they'll be transitioning in terms of personnel on the field. Yeah.
I agree about Preisner though. Like,
great
defensive player his whole career, and he
made himself
into
a
hitter this year.
Number 2 hitter in the lineup. Yeah. Really, really impressive.
Yep, exactly. Well, Tim, I appreciate you doing this tonight. A lot of good stuff. A lot of good trips down memory lane.
Good visiting with the Stiers family, not in baseball uniforms.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
I miss you down at third, Tim.
Yeah, it is now. I can't believe it. I haven't coached in 11 years. I can't believe it. I can't believe it's been that long. People say, do you miss it? Their aspect, the competition, the feeling. There is no greater feeling in the world than you're in the dugout in a state championship game and you feel like you're going to throw up. God, I wish I could feel that way. We did it twice, and it's the greatest feeling in the world for a coach and a player. That's the part I meant. The love, the competition is what I miss. And the kids, the kids that we had 2 great groups of kids that came through Mishawaka Marion High School that were outstanding players and created our success. And it's great to see somebody so committed to being great at what they do. And we had that. That was pretty cool.
Yep, absolutely. Some really good teams. Like you said, a couple state championship appearances during that run. Tim Priester, of course, you can see all this stuff, irishillustrated.com, and on their podcast as well. Appreciate it. Once again, Tim, have a good rest of your summer.
Thanks, Sean. Jesse, good to see you. All the best to you, kid.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Take care.
Talk to you guys later. Yep.
Okay, sounds good. All right. The godfather of the Notre Dame football beat, Tim Priester. Checking out. How are you, Jess?
It's been a long week and a half. It's only going to get longer.
You look like you're a little less frazzled than the last time that you were on. You were gone all last week.
Yeah, getting probably going to have a lot of 12-hour days this week, but that's all right. Okay.
Well, let's not waste any time. Are you ready for rapid fire?
I am.
You're here for rapid fire. So today is the first day in Jesse's summer whiteboard series. We are doing linebackers today. Do you have your linebacker whiteboard ready to go?
I think so. Let's see what we got here.
It's on you. There's a lot of expectations on this today. Not to put too much pressure on you.
As interactive as possible.
All right. Throw this up there and let's fill up the screen.
All right. So coming into a linebacker chat, there's a lot that you can get into, but I think that what we'll do is kind of stay to the basics of, what it means to be a linebacker. Like, obviously, the first thing you think of is a guy who's relatively, big, 6 foot, 220 pounds, kind of like the prototypical build. You want some athleticism there, but ultimately it's not the biggest decisive factor. So I thought what we would kind of get into is what it means or what attribute is the best in terms of playing, linebacker at an efficient level.
Key to top linebacker play.
Yeah. Long story short, what is the number one key to playing linebacker? And I think a lot of people would say, you kind of start immediately thinking about the physical attributes, but I would make the argument that your mental game and your eyeballs are far more important than any physical attribute that you can have on the football field.
Okay.
So what I tried to do here is color coordinate kind of what's going on. And so if the people don't have a view, I apologize, but I will try to explain it to the best of my ability. So right now I have the offense set up in 22 personnel. We'll just go middle of the field. So 2 wide receivers split out to the left, 1 wide receiver split out to the right. Or actually, sorry, this is 11 personnel. 11 personnel?
Yep.
Yeah.
It's 11.
11 personnel. Sorry. 11 personnel. So you have 2 wide receivers to the left, a tight end in line, and a wide receiver to the right. And then you have the running back split out next to the quarterback and shotgun to the right side. So my argument again is that as the linebacker, the number one thing that you have to do is diagnose the play. And I would say that this happens probably in a similar fashion to recognizing a fastball or off speed in baseball. Like, it is a very quick process. As soon as the ball is hiked, you have to your eyes have to be able to diagnose the play immediately, essentially. And if your eyes can't diagnose the play, then your instinctual habits of where you need to go are going to be lacking. And so oftentimes when you out there not necessarily trusting their reads or knowing what their reads are, they're going to be a step late. They're going to get to the play late, and it's going to allow a play to, because that's really all a running back needs is a split second in the crease of someone not being there in a team defense, and they're going to be gone, right? Like a 5, 6, 10-yard gain almost immediately. So what I'm looking at here is Notre Dame would be playing basically a 4-3 defense look, 4 down linemen. Each defensive end would be shading the outside man. And so in this case, one defensive end would be shading the outside shoulder of the tackle. The other defensive would be shading the outside shoulder of the tight end. The third linebacker in this play is technically kind of like a walk down safety or a rover. Someone who's going to have, pass support, but mainly he's in there for run support because you have a tight end to that side, you have a running back to that side. So you need to have, someone to this side essentially in order to help support on the run play. But the main guys that I'm looking at are the inside linebackers on this play. So if we're looking at the blue linebacker or the linebacker to the 2 wide receiver side, his read is this blue triangle that correlates with it. So he is reading between guard, center, and running back. And realistically, the running back is your last kind of read. The main 2 guys that you're looking at are the guard and center because they're going to tell you what's happening in the play. And if you can't diagnose what's going on between guard and center, or maybe they're not giving you enough, that's when you peek back to the running back to kind of see, maybe these guys are giving you no sort of, pulling guard or, crashing down on the nose guard, whatever it might be. They might not be giving you something that indicates run. And so you kind of have to peek back to the running back in order to determine, okay, what's going on essentially. And so at this blue linebacker position, the first thing you're going to look for, okay, is my guard in front of me, is he crashing down? And I need the right line type here. Is the guard crashing? I did it again. What is going on? There it is. Okay. Is the guard crashing down to the nose, or is the guard taking a step back and, pulling whatever direction it might be, maybe to the right, maybe to the left? And so if the guard pulls, obviously you're flowing, you're following the guard or center that's pulling. That's going to take you to the run action. And immediately you're communicating to the other linebacker, hey, pull, 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 pull. And you're starting to work down the line as a unison, depending on which way they're pulling. And as you see pull, a lot of times you're going to shoot down underneath it and try to cut that guard off or center off, or shoot underneath it essentially to kind of fill that hole. So that's the number one thing that you got to look for first, is again, reading through this guard, center, and running back kind of triangle. And if those guys don't give you anything, and I'll tell you the hardest play here is when those guys don't give you any action, that probably means this big whopping tackle is crashing down, and you as a linebacker have to get underneath that before he does. And that entails shoving yourself, taking your shoulder into a 300-pound man that's crashing down on you as quickly as possible. That was my least favorite read, because I don't know about you guys, but again, when a big tackle is coming down on you and you just have to throw your body into it, it's not the most fun time. But in a defense where you have to funnel the ball and you have to, stay gap responsible, it's just what you got to do sometimes, right? You just got to suck up that guy and funnel the play to the next guy. So that's the blue side linebacker. The green side linebacker to the tight end and one wide receiver side. Again, you're working through the same kind of triangle: guard, center, running back. And as soon as you see something on your side, you obviously immediately have to, communicate it to the linebackers next to you, because that's, again, pulling guards and centers are like the jackpot to linebackers. It makes your reads so easy because they're going to take you to the play most oftentimes. Like, are there teams sometimes that, decoy a pull? Sure. But I mean, that's like 1 in every 10 times. Like, they're going to show you where the play is going majority of the time. So you read through your guard, center, and running back to diagnose the run play. Okay, so say you go through that progression and you notice, again, this is a 1 to 2 second read, you notice that nothing is going on. So immediately this blue side linebacker has to shift his eyes down the line at wide receivers, because you have now diagnosed that it's not run. And so you need to move on to pass. And so your eyes will take you. I've numbered these wide receivers 2, 1. And if anyone were closer, like say a tight end was over here, you'd go 3, 2, 1. And immediately you have to get your eyes on this wide receiver, because if this wide receiver, maybe he runs a shallow cross underneath you, well, you need to step up on this shallow cross, stay in your zone, and then eventually pass it off to the next linebacker underneath here, right? Say this number 2 wide receiver runs a streak. Well, then your eyes have to immediately move on to the number 1 wide receiver and see what he's doing. Because if he comes into your zone, well, now you need to step over and help out on this underneath route, right? And so you're immediately, you have to diagnose the route concept to your side of the field. And it starts with the closest wide receiver and then works its way down, to the non-closest wide receiver, essentially. And say both of these guys, vacate your zone. Maybe there's double streaks, right? Well, that means something is going to work its way to you eventually. Unless they're running all streaks, this linebacker kind of has to eventually work into the hole, or maybe he's keeping his eyes on this running back and seeing if he's going to come out into this flat, because if he comes into that flat, more often than not, you have to be underneath it. And especially in man, in a man concept, the linebacker's number 1 responsibility is the running back. That's going to be their guy. And so you have to keep eyes on that running back at all times possible. So that's blue side of the field. Now, if we go over to the green side of the field, what you have to do with this tight end is, since you are so close to him as a green side linebacker, and this goes for any pass route, but even more so for something like this with the tight end being so close, is you have to intersect that tight end in a pass play and do everything you can to get your hands off of them and give them what's called a reroute, because then that gives your safety and your rover linebacker the ability to kind of recover, because you're providing them an extra step by knocking this tight end or whoever it might be, wide receiver, off of their course and allowing everyone else to recover. So, maybe this tight end runs a streak, right? Okay, that's fine. He's vacating my zone, but I'm still going to get my hands on him. And immediately after I get my hands on him, I'm looking over to the next wide receiver to see if he's going to occupy my zone after the tight end leaves the zone. And so even though someone is leaving your zone, there's often a good chance that if they're leaving, someone else is coming. So your eyes have to immediately shift to the next threatening wide receiver. And so this is all in a span of, a few seconds. We're looking at our triangle, guard, center, running back. We're diagnosing, is this a run or pass play? Immediately, if we notice, pulling guards, pulling centers, we need to follow that action and lead it to the run play. And then if we don't see that action, okay, then we've determined pass, and we need to immediately shift our eyes to this route concept and diagnose the route concept and figure out who's coming to you, all while in the meantime, again, trying to do what we can to disrupt this first immediate threat of a route, get our hands on them, and allow the rest of the covering defense or the coverage defense the ability to recover and get to their zone as well. And this is This is why I think that your eyes and mental game and diagnosing the play is far more important than any physical attribute that there is. Because if you can't diagnose the play, well, it doesn't really matter because you're not going to get there because you don't know what's going on.
Boom. Shabam. Good stuff.
Hope that was, I was trying to go in a slow and steady pace. So I hope, usually I have a bad habit of going really fast. So I hope that that was slowed down and condensed for the viewers. But again, the main thing that I was getting at is the linebackers have to diagnose the play with their eyes before anything else. And
In a
your
very short
alignment
amount of time.
in a very short, and that's what my analogy was, is like as a hitter, you know, you're diagnosing fastball and off speed in such a short amount of time. I would say it's pretty similar as a linebacker, diagnosing run pass and then getting your eyes, you know, if it is a run, getting your body to where it needs to be based off a pulling action. And if it's pass, getting your eyes to the wide receivers and diagnosing, you know, whatever route concept is happening.
All right. Good stuff. The whiteboard will be back next week with another position from Jesse. So fill in the blank. Lindy's magazine projects Notre Dame to play LSU in the Peach Bowl this season. It would be blank if that happens.
It would be Peach Bowl. That's like the new, if I'm right, that's like the new New Year's Six bowl game, right? Like that's
It's a New Year's Six.
While my expectations are a national championship or playoff appearance, I do not think that there is anything wrong with a New Year's Six bowl appearance as well. And at this point in Notre Dame's stage, it shouldn't be about appearances. It should be about winning the game, because they've made a lot of them, but they haven't really won many of them. So I think it's fair that that's their projection. I think that that's ultimately what they should be considering their basement this season, and their ceiling should be, you know, a playoff appearance. But anything outside of those two things, I think it's an unsuccessful season for Notre Dame because of, you know, what we saw here, the added talent at maybe some of the positions of weakness this season. On top of it being Marcus Freeman's second season, you know, there's just a lot more moving parts this year. So I would be okay with that appearance. But again, that's my basement in my eyes. Anything below that, I think is an unsuccessful season.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all think that this team is college football playoff worthy. You know, like they're going to be in contention for a college football playoff. So there'd be some disappointment. But, you know, you're playing LSU. You know, you got to run into your old girlfriend or boyfriend or, you know, whatever at some point, right? It happens at some point. You know, it's happened a couple of times for Notre Dame in the past where you've had, you know, Tyrone Willingham coached here. He goes to Washington. Notre Dame plays them. Bob Davie, you know, fired, worked in TV for a long time. He ended up at New Mexico, even though he didn't make the trip up here. You know, New Mexico did. But you know, LSU, Notre Dame's played LSU a few times over the years, and 3 different bowls, I think, since 2006. And, you know, you were thinking a little bit bigger picture. I think there would be some disappointment because they're not in the playoff, but you'd still be in a New Year's Six bowl. You'd be playing LSU and you'd get that reunion with Brian Kelly. You know, I wouldn't have wanted that circus like this past year at the end of Marcus Freeman's first season, but hey, it's bound to happen sometime. If they're both going to be good, they're going to be, you know, there's going to be chances they're going to play either in a New Year's Six bowl or, you know, in maybe even in the playoff, with the playoff expanding next year. Like next year, not this year, but next year, if you're in the Peach Bowl, it means you're in the playoff. So, you know, that's not what it's going to mean this year. So there'd be a tinge of disappointment, I think, but you'd still at least be in a New Year's Six bowl, and you'd get that Brian Kelly, Marcus Freeman matchup. So it'd be very interesting to say the least. Why not? Which conference is most likely to look the same as it does now 5 years from now? ACC or the Pac-12?
I'm going to go with the Pac-12. I think there's a lot of disparity still with what's going to kind of happen after some of these teams leave. I think there might be still a little bit more of shuffling. And the ACC really seems like they want all these things, but they're not realistic expectations or realistic goals. They have a binding contract. It's going to cost them a lot of money to get out of that contract. And I even think that even all the teams within the conference aren't even on the same page. You have some schools that believe in, kind of profit sharing essentially, and other schools who believe that, profits should go to the sports or the teams that generate essentially the most wealth and revenue in those regards. So I think the ACC has a lot to work out internally. And I think that they're kind of locked in more so than the Pac-12. And so I think that you're going to see the Pac-12 kind of disperse more so over the next 5 years, or maybe a greater chance of disbursement compared to the ACC.
So you think the Pac-12 has the greater chance of splintering off than the ACC?
Yeah, I do.
I thought what I heard you say initially was you thought the Pac-12 had the better chance to stay together, and I agree that I think it's the ACC that has the better chance to look the same because like I think we just talked yesterday. There's already talk about the Big 12 maybe grabbing Colorado to come back in out of the Pac-12, and I think that like you could even see. There's talk about San Diego State and SMU, whether they get added to the Pac-12. So I think the Pac-12 5 years from now is going to look a lot different. I think the ACC, because of that contract you were talking about, I mean, it's been a year now since the whole, college football world really turned upside down with USC, and UCLA going to the Big Ten. And that's when all this grant of rights stuff started coming up with the ACC, for like, could schools get out of it, all that different stuff. And I think that if there was a viable way for them to get out of the ACC without literally paying hundreds of millions of dollars, somebody would have done it by now. Florida State or Clemson would have done it by now, I think. So I think the ACC has the better chance to remain intact for the next 5 years between those two. So we've been predicting season win totals, and we've talked about Colorado a bit in the last week. Deion Sanders' Buffaloes have a Vegas over-under of 3.5 wins. So here's their schedule for the upcoming season. At TCU versus Nebraska, at Oregon versus USC, at Arizona State versus Stanford, at UCLA versus Oregon State versus Arizona, at Washington State, at Utah. So, Jess, will Colorado get to at least 4 wins? Will they hit the over for the season?
So I thought for this one, a fun exercise would just go team by team, see we both go, win loss, and then kind of see what our overalls look like towards the end. So we'll start with TCU. Even though I'm gonna say they're gonna lose, but I think it's going to be a relatively close loss.
Yeah, I mean, everyone talks about Colorado's roster turnover. There's a lot of turnover at TCU as well. No Max Duggan anymore. I agree. I think it's going to be closer than most people think, but I still think TCU ends up winning this game.
Okay. Versus Nebraska. I say they pick up their first win of the season against Nebraska. I think Nebraska, Big Ten team, but they've been going through it as of recent. New coaches, a lot of turnover themselves. I just think they're going to have more talent by the time it's all said and done, and I think they're going to sneak out their first win against Nebraska.
I'm leaning that way as well. They were only 4-8 last year. They bring in Matt Rule. He's a better college coach than an NFL coach, I think, but it's still year one for him as well. I think this is really a toss-up, and I'll give the edge to Colorado since this is in Boulder.
Right, it's their first home game.
Mm-hmm.
At Oregon, I mean, come on, that's an easy one. That's a loss.
Yeah, Oregon, too good. They're going to lose that one. USC,
also a loss.
Also a loss. Yes.
Arizona State, I have them picking up their second W against Arizona State.
You don't like the Fighting Drew Pines going up against the Buffaloes? I agree. I think that Arizona State, definitely their best chance, for another win.
Well, again, it's a roster that's seeing a lot of turnover. There's still considered a quarterback competition. Herm Edwards got booted last year midway through.
Another
they
new
have
head
a new
coach.
new head coach there. I just think that Deion's going to have a very athletic and competitive roster. It's just a matter of can he have them playing team football by the time, some of these games roll around. So I got Arizona State win. Stanford.
3-9 last year, another new head coach. It's at the very least it's a toss up, but I'll give the edge to Deion here as well.
I got a 2-win streak going here against Stanford.
It's another home game. Yeah.
I just think that Stanford, again, another head coaching turnover. I don't think that roster is going to be in good shape. I think that Stanford has been fortunate with Jim Harbaugh and then, getting a good amount of what they got out of, is it Shaw? I believe is David Shaw.
Mm-hmm.
And, he struggled his last couple of years. So I don't think the new guy in is going to do any better than what Shaw did leaving. And I think Stanford is actually going to be pretty bad here for the next couple seasons. I think Colorado takes advantage of that and picks up their 3rd win of the season.
I don't know if Stanford ever recovers, to be quite honest.
I don't either.
Like Jim Harbaugh gave him the blueprint. I thought that the handoff from Harbaugh to Shaw, like there might be some drop off. It took a lot longer to see that drop off than I thought it might. Shaw kept that going for a while, but they really by the end of David Shaw's tenure, they were back to what they were before Jim Harbaugh took over. And it's a tough place to win. There's not a lot of interest out there. Jim Harbaugh went against what the rest of, and Shaw continued it again, went against what the rest of the Pac-12 is doing with a much more physical, what they're doing at Michigan now, Midwestern style of football. And I just don't see Stanford being able to get back to that kind of winning, going a different route.
Same. So now we are 3-3. And we are going on to UCLA. There's no chance against UCLA. Chip Kelly's offense, too high powered. They'll run all over. They'll score a lot of points.
Team in the nation last year.
Yeah. So that's a loss. Oregon State, that's a loss. I see a lot of people very high on Oregon State this year, actually. As like
DJ Uiagalelei. That's where he transferred.
I didn't know that.
Yep. I think that's why everyone is so hot. And they were a deceptive 10-3 last year as it was. I think Oregon State is a dark horse
for the Big
12
to
compete out there in the Pac-12 this year. I mean, it's going to be tough. You've got some good teams out there, obviously, between USC, Oregon, Washington, and UCLA. But I think Oregon State's going to be in that mix with them potentially this year.
All right, moving on to Arizona. This is where I have them picking up their 4th win of the season.
I think
no
so
real
as well.
reason. Arizona's not a football school. And
they were a good running team or passing team rather last year, but they were only 5-7, and so I'm giving Deion win number 4 here as well. What about at Washington State the following week?
No, they're not going to beat Washington State, and they're not going to beat Utah the week after that. So,
but they got to 4 by our count, right?
It's funny because we agreed on the same teams, and these are the ones. Like, am I a little optimistic? I think I am, but I think the ones that we have them winning: Nebraska, Arizona State, Stanford, Arizona. I mean, there's a lot of common denominator there, schools that are kind of going through it just the same as Colorado. And I think that puts them on an equal playing field. And to be honest with you, as much as, Deion can be insufferable at times, I still think he's a great head coach. He's only proven results. He's going to get better talent here. He's cleaning up that roster. He's flushing out the guys who aren't going to buy into his philosophy. And by the time they get, halfway through the season, I think they're going to play more competitive games than not. I don't think you're going to see, Colorado just get blown out by everyone.
I agree. I think that what gets the headlines is the massive roster turnover, but you've got enough other teams on the schedule with, coaching changes of their own as well, not quite half, but you've got 4 different teams that they're going to play who also have
head
coaching changes this year, and they've got questions of their own. So
at that point, I think the talent will just, whatever team is more talented will win. And I know that Dion is bringing in, these recruits.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to be tough to root for just based on the way things went down early on. But at the same time, they weren't good at Jackson State before he showed up. He's bringing his quarterback, his sons with him. So, again, 4 wins, you're not going to be lighting the world on fire this year, but I think they'll go over that 3.5 for sure. Okay, fill in the blank. It's blank that Shannon Sharpe is leaving Fox's Undisputed Debate show with Skip Bayless.
It's hilarious that Shannon Sharpe is leaving, in my opinion, but it's such a smart move on behalf of Shannon Sharpe. I honestly hate that Skip Bayless is a Cowboys fan because he puts such a bad name and just overall, when people think of insufferable Cowboys fans, the picture perfect person of that is Skip Bayless, right? Because he is just the worst of the worst when it comes to Cowboy fans. And it just seems like this was kind of a long time coming. In the beginning, I think that Shannon needed Skip, but at this point, I think Skip needs Shannon. And I don't know who's going to be willingly wanting to work with someone like Skip Bayless because he's just so insufferable to work with. And I think the thing that really tipped Shannon Sharpe is they had an argument a few months ago during the NFL season. I think it was before the new year. And basically Skip Bayless took a personal shot at Shannon Sharpe because Shannon Sharpe was taking a shot at Tom Brady. And he basically said, Skip, how are you going to come at me when I'm in the Hall of Fame? I have Super Bowl rings, et cetera, et cetera. When he said, well, and Skip came back and said, well, you're not as good as Tom Brady, so you can't make those comments about Tom Brady. And I think it was at that point that Shannon Sharpe made his decision that he no longer wanted to work with Skip Bayless because in a TV show where it is just lighthearted and you're just kind of going back and forth, that's the point of the show. And then you start taking personal shots at a guy for no reason that is, again, in the Hall of Fame, has Super Bowl rings, one of the best tight ends, one of the revolutionary tight ends, kind of paved the way for people like George Kittle, Rob Gronkowski, Travis Kelce, a true receiving tight end. It was just kind of unnerving, I think, for Shannon to hear those comments from someone like Skip Bayless.
Yeah, it's just more evidence that I don't think anybody wants to work with Skip Bayless for everything that you just outlined right there. He's just got one of those reputations, not easy to work with. I used to work with someone like that. Not a lot of fun because of what you're talking about there. You want to debate topics, but you want to be able to keep it lighthearted and not have it go turn into something that it doesn't need to be just because you say something you don't want it to turn into cheap shots and all that kind of stuff. Just because
you disagree.
Yeah, exactly. And then what happens outside of that? Then it affects you shouldn't have what you say on a show talking about sports affect what happens when you're off the air out in real life. And again, I've worked with a person like that. It ain't easy. And Skip Bayless has gone through a lot now at this point. It's going to be really interesting to see who he ends up with down there because, again, the list is short. I saw they were talking about LaShawn McCoy. I've seen him.
He's bad on, what is that? Fox's
Speak.
First,
Speak
or First Things First or whatever it is.
Yeah. Nick Wright,
why would Nick Wright want to go with Skip Bayless, though? I feel like that's just as...
Derek is asking if it was Vince. It is no one on this platform. It's someone I used to work with. Now it's just somebody that I used to know. So we'll leave it at that. You can draw your conclusions for anyone, who knows any of my background. So during college baseball's NCAA regionals last weekend, a Tennessee outfielder was ejected for talking trash to a Clemson base runner in extra innings while he was running in from the outfield. It prompted former Virginia pitcher turned analyst Stephen Schock to tweet, "If we're tossing someone for talking trash, the ump should have to announce what was said over the PA. That way we can know if it's warranted or not." Do you buy or sell that?
So I buy that. I buy that concept, but I sell that it should come down to that, because in every sport, football, baseball, basketball, there's a lot of, on things that shouldn't be said in front of your mother, your girlfriend, your wife, etc., that are said between, people who are competing against each other with high stakes. And so I just think that it's just so petty, because if you're gonna throw someone out for that, then you're basically saying that there should be no dialogue between players at all. There should be no banter between players. Right. It should the only communications that you should have are between each other, because where do you draw the line of what's too far and what's not too far? Because I like I said, I've been on plenty of fields. There's plenty of things that are said, and there's plenty of things that referees hear, and more often than not, they just say, "Hey, I don't want to hear that. If you're going to say that,
yeah, that's right.
Keep that between you two. I don't need to hear that." And so for the umpire to take the next step in a regional game between two, high caliber teams, it's just, again, going back to the underlying concept that umpires think that they need to have more say in the game than what they do. Their job is to be there, enforce the rules of, balls and strikes, fair or foul, etc. But when it comes to, tossing guys out for just talking to each other, or, maybe having a heated exchange here and there. But it's not like they were even in each other's face. These guys were going by each other. This was in transit.
Yeah, they showed a replay. The center fielder was just running in, and apparently, I don't even know how loudly he shouted it. He said something because the guy was still standing over there by second base. He never got up in his face. It was not confrontational at all. Look, what happened after the women's national championship game, with Angel Reese? Everyone's talking about, oh, trash talk, trash talk is part of the game. We had Muffet McGraw on. I've got this bird outside my window, by the way, who has crashed into this window probably 20 times today. I don't know what this bird has been doing, but
he's blind.
Yeah. I had Muffet McGraw on after that women's championship game. She said, she doesn't necessarily prefer trash talk, but trash talk is part of the game. I guess by the time Angel Reese really got into her thing, like the game was over. So it's not like you're going to toss her out anyway. But my point is, in basketball, at worst, it's a technical foul first, and then you shoot some free throws. Like there's no reason, there was no actual fight going on. There was nothing close to a brawl. There was nothing like that. It's just over the top by these rabbit ear umpires to do something as well.
Like this,
and it's like the heat of what's going on in extra innings. You're exactly right.
So unless these guys are like face to face, getting ready to start throwing blows, it's like, come on, man. It's 2 seconds of him running by and saying something, like they're going to their dugouts, etc. This is a high stake game, extra innings. I'm not saying you need to warrant trash talking, but it's going to happen here and there, and especially in intense games where everyone is, everyone is doing what they can to win. And I just don't like it, because now you're taking away a starter and a big time player for the other team in extra innings when it really matters the most.
Yeah. Chi-Town, going back to what we were talking about with Skip Bayless a minute ago, says, bring in his old co-host, Woody Page. True story. Now, this has been, close to 20 years ago when Vince and I were doing a show together back on the ESPN radio affiliate here in South Bend. This has been a while, but I had Woody Page on my show one day, and I asked him about Skip, and he said that Skip is the most miserable person in the world. He said that on the show, that Skip Bayless is the most miserable person in the world. So I don't think.
So Woody's do we blame Shannon Sharp?
Yeah, that's right. So I don't think Woody's going to be running to do a show with Skip anytime soon.
Joe brings up a good point. Whenever a player they berate an umpire on a bad call, you never see an ump go up to a coach when they make a bad move and call him, blah 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 blah. I just wish that umpires would be held accountable after the game. I'm not saying they need to go up there for a 10-minute interview, But I feel like they should say, this is
They
what
should-
I saw. This is what led to the ejection that is ultimately a game-changing ejection. And they can leave it at that. There's no more questions after that, but there
Yep.
should at least be a reasoning or rationale of why a player was ejected in a high leverage situation.
I agree, because the player who was ejected is potentially going to have to go answer to it either at a press conference.
Well, then they
or in the
also get a
locker room or
one-game
whatever.
suspension as
Yeah.
well on top of
And
that.
that's the thing with the NCAA when you get kicked out. Yeah, exactly. Is you get one more game, after that. So it's like double indemnity. Like, I completely agree. There needs to be some kind of accountability, but the NCAA will never hold these officials accountable.
Well, that's the thing is I
know?
just hate, my least favorite thing to do. And this is when the umpire is in the wrong, right? Or the referee. As soon as the game is over, what do? Bolt off the field, bolt off the court,
Well,
and they're never to be seen again.
but they also, with all this umpire abuse and referee abuse, but this is part of it, I think, because there's no accountability on their part. Coaches have to be accountable, players have to be accountable. There's no accountability on the officials' part. And when you're talking about college sports,
they get to have the most say, and that's the crazy part.
They get to have the most say, and they're being paid to be there. It's not like they're volunteering to umpire or referee these days. They're being paid to be there. So I think that they should have to be held much more accountable than what they are. We will wrap it up with that tonight. Appreciate you being here, Jess. Good stuff with the whiteboard. Look forward to more of that next week. We'll talk to you later in the week. Smash the like button on your way out. Thanks to Tim Priester for being here tonight. And we will talk to you tomorrow on IB Nation Sports Talk.